Great. Hi, I'm Rachel Herman. I am with the East Fork Journal, and today I am interviewing Bill Abbott, poet extraordinaire, um, who has recently published My Life and Other Famous Train Wrecks of Ohio. So thank you for being with us today.
Absolutely.
So to start off, how did you get your start as a poet?
I was 18. I was in college my freshman year, and I was bored, and I was kind of, everything was building up. I was alone. I was, away from my parents and starting my own life. And I was sitting alone in my dorm room, and I just grabbed a sheet of paper and started writing. And I had no idea what I was doing. I had no plan. I had no idea of what it even was. And my roommate walked in after I was done, and I said, "Here, read this." And he did, and he said, "Oh, you wrote a poem." And I was like, "No, I didn't." And yeah, I did. But, and then for the first year or so, well, for the first several months, I wrote about, I don't know, maybe a poem every month or two. And then after that, I decided that I was a poet, and I started writing about 3 poems a day, and they were all terrible. But I mean, I had no training. I'd never read anything. I read some poetry in classes along the way, but I had no clue what I was doing. And so I set out to invent the wheel. And, it had been invented several times before. So, so I was very much self-taught for a very long time. And, eventually I got to that point, got to the training, I guess, but it was just writing, that was my start.
When you started like seeking out other poetry and trying to like teach yourself, were there any poets that you felt like drawn to, or any writing styles that you were drawn to?
When I started, I had no idea. When I started, I really didn't know anything much about poetry.
Right.
For the first few years, I didn't know. I'd read some, the stuff that everybody reads in high school.
Right.
And a little bit in college, but nothing, nothing extraordinary. Nothing really stood out in the early days for me. I was kind of blazing my own trail, and I didn't even have anything to look at, So, but later, quite a few places, quite a few people, but when I started, no, I was not going, "Ooh, Walt Whitman." No, it was not.
I don't know many people that say, "Ooh, Walt Whitman."
No. A few people, a few people really do, but not that many.
Well, here in Claremont County, I haven't come across any, but I'm sure they exist.
Not so much.
Yeah. So when you start a poem, what's your process? Like, does it just come organically from what you're going through, or do you have to like set time every day to write? How do they develop?
When I started writing, I just wrote. It was just all. It was all right there. Now, in more recent years, the longer I wrote, the less that happened. Now I kind of need an idea. I kind of need a starting point. And it's kind of hard to figure out what that is sometimes.
Mhm.
I know that I work best these days when I give myself some sort of artificial deadline.
Yeah.
I have to say, you have to write a poem a day or something,
Mhm.
because if I don't, then I'm not going to write.
Mhm.
It just becomes one of those things that doesn't happen. You know,
Life gets in the way. Yeah.
life gets in the way. It really
Yeah.
does.
Yeah. And then it piles up inside of you and you just need to get it out. At least that's how I am. Like if I don't write for a while, I just can feel it like building up inside of me. So I don't know if you're like that or not. So when you have the poem down, do you edit it or do you let it sit a while or do you like give it to somebody else to kind of look over? What's your editing process?
I'm bad at editing. I mean, I'm, I don't know any poets. I know poets who have been doing this for really long stretches of time, and even they say I'm bad at editing.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't think editing comes naturally. But there are some people who edit like crazy too. I'm not saying I don't edit, but at the same time, I have to give myself space.
Yes.
And a lot of the time I'm editing as I'm writing.
Hmm.
I'll write a line and I'll stop and erase it, and I'll write another line and I'll stop and change part of it. And it's uh, Kurt Vonnegut used to say that there are two primary kinds of writers. There are swoopers and bashers. And and so I'm trying to remember exactly how that goes. But there are the people who write the whole thing and they get it all out and then they come back to it later and edit. And then there
Hmm.
are the people who edit as they go.
Hmm.
And I think I fall more into the edit as I go end of it.
Hmm. Hmm. Speaking
Um,
of, oh, I'm sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, then I try to go back and edit a little bit more later, but I feel like the heavier end of it is happening when I'm writing it.
Hmm. Hmm. Speaking of Kurt Vonnegut, Phoebe's husband is a huge fan. So if he's there at your reading, you should. I don't know if you've met Don before, but he's a huge fan. I took his class last semester, and yeah, he actually got me into reading his work. So, yeah. So I would like to touch on your biography a little bit, and it says in your book that you used to do poetry slam. And
Yeah.
I have no idea what that is. So I was wondering if you could kind of enlighten me and share with everybody else who doesn't know
Okay.
what it is.
So here's the basic concept, and then here's the bigger picture.
Okay.
The basic concept is that there's starting in 1988 in Chicago.
Hmm.
There was there was a poet who wanted to run a show, who wanted to start a show that would, and his name was Mark Smith, and
Hmm.
he wanted to do something different. He wanted to bring people in. He wanted to make people more interested in the reading. So what he did was he said, well, the best way to do that is to turn poetry into a sport, because
Hmm.
Americans love sports. So
Right.
what you do is you get a group of poets, you get, whoever signs up that night, and you tell them, okay, we're doing a slam. And then people, you advertise in advance, it's a slam, and people show up and they expect it.
Hmm.
Um, so it's competitive. So what happens, you get 12 poets sign up, and each poet gets up in the first round and they read one poem. The poem has to be 3 minutes or less, and it has to be original to them, and they are not allowed to use any props or any
Hmm.
music or any, rubber chickens or whatever it is they want to use.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so when they finish reading their poem, then random judges are picked from the audience ahead of time. And these random judges, and the best judges are the ones that have no idea what's going on. And it usually happens in a bar, so people are usually a little bit drunk. Um, Sometimes they're in coffee shops, but a lot of them happen in bars.
Right.
So you get drunk strangers who have no idea what's going on, and they score it like it's the Olympics.
Oh
Zero
my
to
goodness.
10, 0 to 10 with a decimal point. They hold up the sign, and the MC does the math and figures out, what your total score is, somewhere under 30.
Hmm.
0 to 30. And the best poets go to the next round, and the best poets of that round go to the final round, and the final round is done, and the best poet wins, usually a small amount of money,
Hmm.
and bragging rights for the month. So, so that's the basic idea of slam. And once a year, then usually about once a year, then they hold what's called a slam off.
Hmm.
And they form like the best 4 or 5 people in the city, and they
Hmm.
say, okay, you are team Cincinnati, or team Dayton, or wherever you're from,
Hmm.
and you go to a team, and as a team you're not competing against each other, you're competing against all the other teams.
Hmm.
um, and I bring that up to say I've run 3 poetry slam festivals, which was groups of people, and they, it was different teams going against each other.
Hmm.
So I've also gone on teams several times myself.
Hmm.
I wrote a book on it called Let Them Eat Moon Pie, which was a history of the Southeast,
Hmm.
of slam festivals there. So that's kind of a really rough idea of what slam is.
It sounds really fun.
And I ran slam for years, once a month, twice a month, for years, and lots
Hmm.
and lots of poetry open mics along the way.
That's great. So when you're writing, is there like, can you tell what if a poem is, do you write specifically for slams, or do you like go through your repertoire and pick some that, fit that kind of
You know,
setting? Is there?
yes.
Yeah.
When I started writing, I was writing, right? The
Uh-huh.
first few years, I was just writing.
Hmm.
And then 1990, 91, 2 or 3 years into writing and just writing and
Hmm.
handing it to people and going, read this, read this. I heard about this idea of a poetry reading where you get up and you read your poetry to a room full of people.
Hmm.
And, that's great. I don't have to hand it to people one by one and say, hey, read this. And I went to poetry readings for, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 months, 6 months. And then something happened and that reading shut down.
Hmm.
And at the same time that reading shut down, like right before that reading shut down, someone showed up at that reading and they said, hey, we're about to have a poetry slam over here at this other place. So I started going to poetry slams. This was before I was really involved, but I was like, I'm going to read on stage.
Hmm.
So from a very early point in my writing, I decided that when I write something, it's meant to be on stage.
Hmm.
And if anything, it was really hard for me to not write for on stage because, that was my focus.
Hmm.
It took me a while to get past that.
Hmm.
So yeah, when I write, I think, okay, I'm going to be reading this to people.
Right.
Not as much as I used to, but it's still there.
I'll have to reread your book and in that context and see if I can feel that when I'm reading, because I hadn't thought of that before. Like some of the poems are written to be read out loud. So I'll definitely have to look through that again, through that kind of lens.
Mhm.
Um, so I know I sent this to you in email, but to explain, I am from Warren, Ohio. My grandma actually lives right next to Ashtabula and Conneaut. My whole family is from that area.
Okay.
So when I read your book and I read about the train wreck that happened in Ashtabula, I was like amazed that somebody else knew where Ashtabula was to begin with, because it's
Mhm.
like this big. When everything is pretty much closed down since all the steel mills closed down and GM left Lordstown. Um, so my question to you is, how did you stumble across the train wrecks that had happened in Ohio, and how did, I mean, I would never think to write poems about it, but you did beautifully. How did that process go for you?
That was kind of a weird accident for me. I was writing my book. I was pulling
Mm,
my book together,
mm,
and I was trying to come up with a title. I was going through the MFA. It was part of the MFA
mm,
at Miami, and I was trying to come up with a title. And I suggested a title, and my advisor said, "No, that's not a good title." And she said, "What you need to do is um, go off on your own for a while, come back to me in a few days and tell me 20 potential titles for your new book."
mm.
And I put one of my 20 ideas was blank and other blanks. And at some point I was like, I spent some time thinking about that, and I was like, yeah, yeah. Um, my life and other, and it was like, oh, train wrecks. Okay. Um, and I live in Ohio now, but I'm from Tennessee.
Right, right.
But I was like, okay, I live in Ohio. I'm going to write about train wrecks in Ohio, because I'd already written a couple of um, Ohio poems that are in that book.
Mm, mm-hmm,
Buckeyes being one that kind of stood out for me.
mm-hmm.
And so I said, well, if my book is going to be called My Life and Other Famous Train Wrecks of Ohio, I better have some train wreck poems.
Right, right.
So I went and started researching. I just
Mm-hmm.
I started reading pretty seriously, and I found it. I decided I was on the right track when I realized I live in Middletown, and I realized that there's a train wreck that happened in Middletown, and
Mm-hmm.
people that died there, unnamed passenger who had the initials WA stitched onto their handkerchief, and I'm William Abbott. And
Wow,
so I was like, maybe this is the right direction. And so I
that's
just
pretty
kept
cool.
I just kept researching. I was just like, well, that's weird synchronicity, right?
Yeah. So
Um,
how did you go about researching it then? Did you like enlist a lot of librarians? Did you just do it online or?
I did a lot of it online, and I started talking to other people in the area.
Mm,
Um, in particular, I spent some time talking to a local bookstore owner here in town
nice.
to try to get some ideas of what he was thinking. But yeah, most
Hmm.
of it was just online research.
Hmm. Which is much easier than when I was a kid and we had the
Oh,
Encyclopedia Britannica.
oh
You know,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
No, research now is a completely different animal than it was when we were young.
Yeah, it's much more enjoyable than, microfiche and all that stuff that'll date me. So moving on.
Sure.
Um, so one thing that and I was sharing this with you earlier when we were talking before the interview, that I really admire about your work is how open and personal you are when you write. And something that I personally struggle with is knowing that line of what I should share, what I shouldn't share, and then kind of like pushing myself to share. And I was curious, like, how do you establish those boundaries for yourself? Or is it just something unconscious that happens? Or
Um, to a large extent, it's, if anything, I overshare on a regular basis anyway. So, I will probably put too much information into a poem if I'm not trying.
right?
I have to I have to pull myself back
Mm-hmm.
in comparison to, as you were saying, you're afraid of oversharing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm more the other direction. I'm more, oh, let me tell you everything.
Right.
Uh, so but you know, it's all part of it. It's all part of poetry. It's all part of trying to get everything out.
And when I was reading your work, you would think that being that open would come off. I mean, and I'm not saying it does, but to me, when I write, if I overshare, I think, oh, I'm going to come off as being vulnerable or fragile but when I read your work, it comes off so strong. Like you're so like you own who you are, you own what you're going through. So I sincerely respect that and admire that a lot. So thank you. Like I told you before, it really has kind of kicked me in the keister to be more open when I write. So thank you. Um, I wanted to talk about your teaching. You teach creative writing, correct, at Central
So
State? Yes.
yeah,
Um,
I want to expand that. I don't have as many creative writing students as I want, but
mhm.
I do teach some creative writing when I'm
So,
not stuck
oh,
teaching
sorry.
composition.
No. What do you try to impart on each of your students when they're in your class? Like, what are the key lessons that you want to leave them with when writing?
I want them to be able to express themselves. I want
Mhm,
them to be able to really say what they're thinking,
mhm,
because it is important. We are not a society that is too worried about self-expression a lot of the
mhm,
time. And so I really think that creative writing is a good method of learning who you are,
mhm,
of helping you understand who you are, what you believe, what you stand for.
mhm,
And so I really want to show my students that. I want them to have a good understanding of what poetry is. I want them to not have to reinvent the wheel like I did. Um, I want them to, I want to be able to say, here are things that you can learn. Here are books you can read. Here are um, approaches that you might not have considered. One of the things that absolutely floored me when I was learning to write my own stuff was, it doesn't all have to be personal.
mhm,
You can write a persona poem. You can write a poem from someone else's perspective. And that was something that really kind of shook me.
mhm,
Um, and it is a good feeling for me that I can tell people, hey, you don't have to write about you all the time.
mhm,
You can write about yourself indirectly, or you can write about things that you care about without it being you.
mhm,
So that's one of many, many things that I would like to make sure that people understand when they're learning to write.
mhm.
So that's the general idea.
Well, I've been reading poetry for 30 years, and I honestly hadn't thought of that, so I just learned something. So thank you. I tend to make it, like I was telling you earlier, really personal, and I think it'd be fun to explore that more, making it impersonal or going from a different perspective. So thank you.
Absolutely.
So, do you have any advice for poets or writers who are looking to get published? I know it's kind of like a
That's a big
like the
question.
I know.
Um, there, if you're really serious about being published, then do it. Um, and the thing is, I mean, everybody is, oh yeah, well, I'm going to write, I'm going to get it published.
Mhm,
I've got a friend who has been, publishing his poetry on his blog, and he's been doing things. So, there's plenty of ways that you can publish.
mhm,
Maybe it's just for yourself, maybe it's for other people, but understand that, you're not going to get the recognition that you want right away.
mhm,
You're not going to send off a poem and have them write back and go, oh my God, this is the best poem I've ever read. Please let us publish this. This is wonderful. That doesn't happen.
Right.
You know, I sent my book, I sent Trainwreck to 20 different places before one of them published it.
And it's amazing.
I send poems out all the time, and they get rejected. Even the ones that I think are absolutely the best poems I've ever written.
Right.
And people say this is not the right fit for us. And then you turn around and you send it again, right? You find somewhere else and you send it again. You can expect one of my mentors, Hua Wen, says that trying to get a poem published is like trying to home puppies.
It's trying to what? It's trying to what?
Home puppies. You know,
Okay.
you have a bundle of puppies and you want people to take these puppies. Oh, this puppy is so wonderful.
Right.
No, I don't need a puppy. Right.
Right.
So trying to get a poem published is kind of like that. You know, there's between 5 and 10%, depending on your aim, between 5 and 10% of poems get published. You know, and there are plenty of places, you know, you're going to send it to the New Yorker, right? And you're going to love it and it's going to be fantastic. Yeah, you know, the acceptance rate on the New Yorker?
No.
It's way below 1%.
I'm sure.
Way below.
Right.
So, you know, you aim for around 10% acceptance. And there are some places that will accept like half of what they get. And so that's an easy target, and that's a good place to start, I guess. But you know, you get progressively harder, and as you get to be a better writer, then you get progressively harder. And 10% is probably a good acceptance rate to aim for. I'm aiming a little below that at this point, and so I'm not publishing a lot.
Yeah.
But you know, it's a goal. It's something to aim for.
It's better than 0, which is what I'm at right now.
It's better than 0.
Yeah. So, well, I really enjoyed meeting you today and your book.
Absolutely.
And I'm looking forward to hearing you read on Monday. So thank you very much.
No problem. Happy to do this.